Reprofiles of Terror, Ronde, Lake Dolphin. On the same date, 6 years apart, two horrific tragedies would occur at the same location at Ronde, an amusement park located on Île Saint-Hélène in Montreal. In both incidents, the victims drowned in quick, frenzied, and panic-filled circumstances, and despite the tragic nature of these events on Lake Dolphin, the events have now been all but forgotten. Ronde, a large amusement park located in Montreal, is situated on Île Saint-Hélène, a man-made island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. Built as part of the larger Expo 67 World's Expo project and opened in 1967, the amusement complex, despite the temporary purpose of the exposition, continued operations after '67 and remained owned and operated by the City of Montreal. During construction, in order to save time and costs, the land on which the park was built was separated by large man-made lakes and rivers. One of these is Dolphin Lake, which the entirety of Ronde wraps around in a crescent shape. The lake itself featured various attractions, including a pirate ship and daily performances for guests to enjoy on the lake by the aquatic team Les Marsouins. With the park not circular in shape, guests were invited to cross the lake either by gondola overhead or by a small passenger ferry that shuttled guests on a 15-minute journey around Dolphin Lake. Built as a place for enjoyment, the Central Lake has, however, seen its share of incidents, including those that have led to fatal circumstances. The most alarming of these are two major incidents that occurred on July 8th, 6 years apart from one another. On July 8th, 1973, the years that followed Expo 67 with Ronde and with Man of His World were busy, enough to still entertain longer hours at Ronde until 2:30 in the morning. Ronde that year featured numerous bars and eateries that catered to nightlife, including the Jardin des Étoiles nightclub, a German beer hall, British Bulldog pub, and Silver Garden Saloon, all original hospitality features of Expo 67. Because of this, the later evenings at Ronde could end up being rowdy affairs. Most of these bars were located around the central Lac Dauphin. In order to handle any potential incidents and to help handle crowds from Expo 67 in later years, Police Station 8 was established and served as an on-site satellite division for the park and Man in His World, only operating from May through September. That year was the park's sixth of operation, and against public expectation of dwindling attendances, Ronde saw 250,000 attend its first 6 weekends of operation. By July 8th, the summer period had arrived and was consistently busy as the park was on July 8th. At around 1:20 a.m., Carmen Tremblay, a 20-year-old Montreal woman, jumped over one of the lake's fencing chains and climbed on a small dock used by Les Marsouins. Claiming to have trespassed into the forbidden area simply to dip her feet in the lake, Tremblay, also intoxicated, under the poor lighting in the forbidden area, lost her footing and slipped off the dock, falling into the dark waters of Lake Dolphin. Possibly encouraged by the libations enjoyed during the evening, she immediately began to scream wildly for help. Station 18's two on-shift police officers that evening were André Desailly and Claude Cerizan. At the moment Tremblay fell into the lake, the two were on their scheduled break, having a meal together at a nearby restaurant when they heard the young woman's screams, running immediately to the scene. Desailly, new to Station 8 and reportedly shy, immediately jumped into the water to help. Struggling towards Tremblay, he pushed her towards a nearby ski ramp also used in Les Marsouins' performances, and in so doing pushed himself further back from the shore. Onlookers reported that Desailly appeared distressed, like he were coughing up sick, and Cerizan, on seeing his partner struggling for life, immediately jumped into the water to help. Cerizan was on record as not knowing how to swim, and reportedly sunk and disappeared into the water without resurfacing. Tremblay, now among the gathering crowd and commotion that followed her way out of the park and stayed back home with a friend, although other reports suggest that she went to a party to continue enjoying the night. No matter the case, possibly sensing some guilt at what had occurred and that she had not stayed, Tremblay called the police to find out if any recent drownings had been reported. Through the conviction of a shrewd officer on the phone, they were able to convince Tremblay to surrender, and a cruiser was sent to collect her for questioning. Desailly, 25, had been on the force for 4.5 years and left behind a wife and newborn son. Serzin, 36, and a 15-year veteran of the force, left behind a wife and 7 children. It took the arriving authorities 20 minutes to find sufficient equipment to attempt a rescue of the officers, whom they eventually found with flashlights floating in the water 3 feet from each other. A performer with Les Massouins, Robert Tremblay, not reportedly a relation to the other Tremblay, retrieved the officers' bodies from the water 45 minutes after their drowning. There was and still is confusion as to why the officers drowned. While both reportedly did not know how to swim, the depth of Lac Dauphin was only 15 feet at its deepest, and both officers were within feet of the shore or floating structures to provide relief. It was agreed, however, that the bulky police officer uniforms they were wearing, with its 4-pound belt and 2-pound radio alone, did not help either struggling man, as both were in full uniform. Tremblay, who left only her shoes behind as a trace of her presence during the incident, was not charged for any wrongdoing despite admitting to police that she knew the officers may have drowned. The date of July 8th was established as a cursed day for the park 6 years later, in 1979. The Mississippi was a passenger ferry that transported approximately 6 riders per trip across Lake Dauphin. Owned by Daniel Charland, the Mississippi was a converted pontoon vessel that featured a decorative shell to give it the appearance of a steam ferry. The boat featured no windows and a single flat-floored surface for standing room and benched seating. The entire vessel was driven and run by a single operator. The 8th of July, 1979, was a busy Saturday, and the Mississippi was preparing for its final trip of the day across Lake Dolphin at approximately 4 p.m. Just boarding was Conchetta Pinto, 47, attending the park with her 4 children, 2 of which, Assunta and Robert, boarded the ferry with her. Her husband and 2 other children remained behind on shore. Unbeknownst to them, it was the last moment they would spend together as a family. The Mississippi cast off for its 15-minute journey with just short of 58 passengers on board, one of which reportedly noted to the boat crew that the vessel had taken on water, but were told by the operator that while seemingly troublesome, this was normal. Completing its journey, the boat was returning to the dock area near the center of the park when observers noticed that the rear of the vessel was sunk lower into the water than the rest. Shortly thereafter, the entire boat began to list on the sunken side, with the weight of the majority of the passengers who had collected there. Then, noticing the rapid sinking of the craft, the passengers on the boat quickly rushed to the opposite side. The correction in weight did not help the vehicle, however, as it had already taken on a significant amount of water. The boat eventually sunk to water level and overturned, trapping many of its passengers underneath. Among these was the young Assunta. Her mother was at the surface of the water, having been thrown from the craft while it overturned. But not finding her daughter among those around her, she immediately submerged back in the water and under the Mississippi to locate her. In so doing, she became trapped underneath and eventually drowned. Her daughter fell unconscious and her floating body was retrieved from the water. She was revived minutes later by a person who remains unknown to her to this day. The capsized Mississippi had trapped many other guests underneath it. With the craft only meters within sight of guests on the shore, many dove into the water to save passengers. Les Marsouins, still performing their daily routines nearby and preparing for the next performance, spotted the trouble and immediately arrived to help, pulling several passengers from the water. While a guest passing by the area, university student Epimenides Rekasinas himself rescued 5 passengers. The area where the boat sank was only 6 meters from the shoreline. Not only was it so close to port, the vessel was also on its last journey of the day when it met its fateful end. It was noted that only a few, if any, of the passengers were wearing life jackets, even though some were available on the vessel. Instead, the passengers simply chose not to wear them during the journey, nor was there any announcement prompting them to do so. 10 of the passengers were taken to hospital. 3 never made it back to shore with their lives. In addition to Pinto, Maurice Catavolo, 6, and Georgetta Ferra, 51, also drowned before they could be pulled from the water. The Mississippi ferry boat service in the aftermath was discontinued with immediate effect, and in the years to follow, all of the attractions that once featured on Lake Dolphin were closed. An iconic photograph taken shortly after the incident, showing the Mississippi capsized with a crowd of onlookers standing by in the background, serves as a haunting reminder of that day. An epitaph written on the back of the print by the photographer working for the Montreal Gazette newspaper reads, "Activity continues at Ronde as boat sinks in foreground." 20 days later, the boat was once again afloat on the water of Lac Dauphin, only this time solely for the benefit of city investigators. While it was turned over, only able to be brought upright after the third attempt, water immediately could be seen draining from a large open and damaged portion of one of its pontoons. It was not known how long the boat had been running with the damage, but it was determined to be partially if not wholly responsible for the accident. The 22-year-old driver, Daniel Charland, had informed the boat's owner, Blanchette, that he was having trouble steering the vessel, only he did so the day of the incident. Today, the sites where these two incidents took place on Lake Dauphin are now public eating areas. There are no indication on site of the tragic incidents of July 8th, but they were not the only victims that Lac Dauphin would claim, as one more would succumb to the water only 2 weeks after the Mississippi incident. The later opening hours of Ronde in its early years posed various problems, a particularly large one being park guests staying within the grounds overnight. The so-called stragglers by authorities were a well-known problem. It was one of these stragglers that became the fourth person to perish in Lac Dauphin that year. Daniel Dugas, 24, along with his brother and cousin, were at the park enjoying many of the bars and night activities. After the park had closed, the trio were still wandering the grounds around 4:30 a.m., having stayed well after the 2:30 a.m. closing time. Despite this, they were not encouraged to leave. The park operators, the Association Montréalaise d'Action Récréative et Culturelle, or AMARC, claimed they are not accountable for making sure people leave the site after it closed at 2:30 a.m. As quoted, "People normally go home, but if they decide to stay, there is nothing we can do. Our security officers can't act as bouncers and battle with people every night to leave." Dugas, being one of these people, was apparently in need to cool off after a presumably hot midsummer day at the park, and in an attempt to do so, or to show off, or motivated by an evening of drinking, dove into the water of Lake Dauphin and swam across the entire quarter-mile distance of the nearly circular lake. About 15 feet from shore, Dugas apparently ran into trouble, which alarmed his observing brother, who knew he could swim well. Whatever the trouble was, it brought Dugas to stop swimming, and he sunk to the bottom of the lake only meters from his helpless companions. Dugas' body was retrieved a few hours later that morning, and the park resumed operations with little indication other than in park commotion as evidence that anything tragic had happened the night before. Lake Dolphin remains a site as intended, completely man-made and only 15 feet in depth, and created as an area for one of Expo 67's original attractions, a water-based illuminations spectacular. Today, it stands as the centerpiece for the park's celebrated fireworks displays, none of whose spectators are aware that the waters reflecting a colorful firestorm of light in the sky took the lives of 6 people who perished on their own encounters with a lake intended to deliver awe and joy.